So welcome everyone to today's webinar, Protecting Seniors from Financial Harm. Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario is pleased to co-present with the Ombudsman for Banking Services and Investments. And we have our speakers who I'll introduce shortly with you. We have, as I mentioned, our ASL interpreters with us today and who will be joining us for the entire program. Before we begin, I'd like to deliver our land acknowledgement on behalf of our organization. We acknowledge that we gather on the traditional territory of a number of First Nations and acknowledge their stewardship of this land and its waters as protectors of its natural abundance throughout the ages. We seek a new relationship with original peoples of this land that remains their home to this day. May this relationship be one of peace and friendship based in honor and deep respect. Just a few items before we begin. Just a reminder for individuals to know that your microphones and cameras are turned off for the session, but we do encourage you to use the chat box to post comments during the webinar. If you have a specific question that comes up that you think of during the presentation, please post that in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen as well. And we'll take time at the end of the presentation today to take those up. As I mentioned, we have our ASL interpreters on screen. You can change the view on your own screen to meet your own needs. If you want to do it as a larger screen for the ASL interpreters and the PowerPoint, you can make that own format for yourself. Just a reminder, we are recording the webinar. It will be posted on our website early next week, and that will be posted along with any documents or links that are shared during the webinar. And we'll be sending a follow-up survey that we would encourage you to give some feedback based on what you've learned today and comments for future sessions that we can plan for educating older adults around protecting their finances or any other topics that you are interested in learning about. I do want to just speak to privacy and confidentiality for a moment. We know that these are public forums, so we do appreciate some people maybe dealing with some personal circumstances. We would encourage you to reach out to us either online or give us a call at our office where we can have more in-depth conversation to help you work through your situation, to give you some support and navigate the situation. So our number there, as I mentioned, is at the bottom of the screen, and our website has many resources that you can also reach out to for support as well. Just a little bit about our organization for those who have joined us for the first time. Our vision is to ensure that all seniors are free from ageism and abuse, and where human rights are advanced and protected and respected. We do implement Ontario's strategy to combat elder abuse and have done so since 2003, which is funded by the Ontario government under the Ministry for Seniors and Accessibility. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speakers today who will be sharing their wealth of knowledge and experience. Our first speaker is Mr. Paddock. He is a Deputy Ombudsman overseeing investments and banking complaints. He's a member of the Ontario Bar and holds a Bachelor of Science from the University of Western Ontario and a law degree from Queen's University. He joined OBSI as a senior investigator in 2003 and was promoted to the Deputy Ombudsman in 2006. Prior to this, he was the director of the Mutual Fund Compliance and In-House Counsel at the large mutual fund dealer. And before entering the financial services industry, he practiced law in Ottawa. So welcome.
Thank you.
And along with Mr. Paddock is Ms. McSorley, and she is also the Deputy Ombudsman, overseeing a team who investigates investments and banking complaints. She's a member of the Ontario and New York Bar and holds a BA from the University of Toronto, St. Michael's College, and a law degree from the University of Ottawa. and she has also spent time as a visiting student at the University of Hong Kong Law School. After being called to the bar, Ms. McSorley practiced law at firms in Toronto and in New York, and then joined a major financial institution as in-house counsel, and then as an executive director in wealth management. They both come with a wealth of knowledge and experience, and we are so looking forward to them giving us some further information today about their role as OBSI investigating disputes between consumers and financial services firms. And they're going to talk about some real cases that they've been dealing with involving vulnerable seniors and give us some tools and resources that they have to offer. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Rob to share his screen and take it over. Thank you.
Okay, can everybody see that okay?
Yep, that's perfect. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. And Rhiannon, thank you very much for the introductions. We would like to thank Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario for the opportunity to speak with you today. And of course, special thanks to Rhiannon for helping us coordinate this session. So let's take a quick look at the agenda and the list of items that we're hoping to talk about today. Okay, so first we'd like to do a bit of an overview of OBSI, tell you about who we are, what we do, and the focus that we put on seniors in our work. And then we want to dive into a few examples of the types of cases that we investigate. There's going to be a big focus on fraud today, but for good reason. Fraud is the #1 issue that we investigate at OBSI, and unfortunately, many seniors are victims of fraud. As we discuss our case studies, we'll suggest some steps that you can take to protect yourself from financial harm. And in addition to those tips, near to the end of our investigation, we're going to talk about powers of attorney, something called the trusted contact person, and also the role of the Office of the Public Guardian and trustee. Finally, we'll leave some time at the end for questions, and Grace and I will do our best to answer them. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so who is OBSI? So OBSI is an independent dispute resolution service for customers of banks and investment firms to use when they can't resolve their complaint directly with their financial institution. So if you have a complaint about your bank or investment firm and you can't resolve it directly with them, you need to try to resolve it directly with them first. But if you can't, then you can bring your complaint to us. So we're independent and we don't act for consumers or firms. So we're in the middle. We're neutral. We're not for profit, and we're national. And finally, and very importantly, our service is free to consumers. So we will investigate your complaint, and if we find that your financial institution has made an error that's caused you financial harm, we can recommend up to $350,000 in compensation. This year, an estimated 25,000 Canadians will reach out to us seeking assistance with their complaint. We are on track to open over 6,000 investigations. So if you have a complaint or a question about lodging a complaint about your financial institution, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to help. Okay, seniors and OBSI. So seniors are a core group of users of OBSI services who have unique issues. 32% of our banking cases and 40% of our investment cases were from consumers 16 over in 2024. And that's actually higher than the proportion of Canadians who are seniors. So not all, but as you know, some seniors are vulnerable. They may have reduced capacity or disabilities. They might not have a good understanding of how the banking or investment system currently works, and they may have challenges communicating. So we are aware of these potential vulnerabilities and we train our staff to identify them so that we can take steps to ensure all seniors have effective access to our service. OBSI, we've been operating for about 28 years. And over that time, we've become very knowledgeable about the challenges that some seniors face. And with that knowledge, we've designed our processes and trained our staff to help seniors through our dispute resolution process. We have senior-specific training for all of our investigative staff. We do things like we do our best to return all calls and emails within 1 business day. During our initial stage of our process, our case assessment officers do a number of things to help seniors. They're the first to identify whether a senior is experiencing a challenge or a vulnerability. The case assessment officer can help the senior articulate their complaint if they're having difficulty doing so themselves. In our process, we have a very important document called our consent letter, and we need every consumer to read and to sign this document before they can use our service. If a senior is having trouble reading our consent letter or can't understand it, our case assessment officers will read through the document with them, will answer any questions that they have, and they can also sign the document on behalf of the senior if they need to do that. Our case assessment officers will note all the preferences that a senior has. For example, what channel of communications do they prefer? What's the best time of day for us to call them or to schedule a call? And then the case assessment officer will note all of this information in our service and then pass it along to the investigator who'll be investigating the complaint so that the senior doesn't have to keep repeating themselves. Sometimes when people contact our office, they'll say, I have a power of attorney for a senior and I'm acting on their behalf. Our staff are trained to check to see if the power of attorney is legitimate, right? And to identify potential elder abuse right at the beginning of our process. And just a final point here. All consumers, including seniors, can appoint an authorized representative to help them through during our process. This is someone who they trust, like a family member or a friend. Seniors certainly don't have to appoint an authorized representative, but the options available to them if that would make them more comfortable. Okay, so that's a little bit about what we do in our processes. So let's get into the case summaries and turn it over to Grace.
Great. Thanks, Rob, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk to you about a couple of different common examples of frauds that we see. Like Rob said at the outset, almost 40% of our cases currently deal with fraud in one way or another. And I'm hoping that by highlighting some of these cases for you, you'll be more attuned to know what to look out for and just to know how to protect yourself. So the stories are not happy ones. We do have cases where people end up being compensated. I'm not going to tell you those stories today because the purpose is really to let you know where the problems lie. So sorry for being a little on the negative side with these stories, but I think they're really important. And we'll talk about a few other places you can look to learn about common frauds that are happening right now. If you could go to the first one, Rob, thanks. So text message scams. Many of you have probably heard about these. They're frequent, and this is one of many examples we could give. So in this particular case, Ms. V got a text message. It looked like it was from her phone company. It, had all the same type of number and graphics. And it said they were giving her a refund because of a promotion. And so she clicked on a link and followed the instructions to select her bank and then log in so that the refund could be deposited. And then a little bit soon after, she was notified by her phone that a $3,000 e-transfer was accepted by an unknown recipient. So this was a big shock to her. So she contacted her bank right away and complained. The bank was not able to pull back the deposit, and they also did not compensate her because the transaction was completed using her confidential banking information. So the case came to us and we looked at the evidence. We interviewed Miss V to get her story. We also looked at the account agreement, which is a really important document that includes the consumer's responsibilities. It also talks about what the firm will do to protect you, but it also talks about what the consumer's responsibilities are and what the firm will do with information it gets from you. So the agreement says the bank is allowed to rely on instructions received from a person with the consumer's confidential banking information. So in this case, the consumer had typed in her information thinking that she was just dealing confidentially with the bank, but unfortunately the fraudster was able to intercept that by sending her that text. So the bank also gave us evidence showing that the consumer's confidential information was used, but also that a one-time password had been sent to her to complete the e-transfer. So in this case, we don't know whether the consumer shared that information with the fraudster or whether she had just clicked on something. But this is the kind of evidence that we can get from the bank showing that the consumer unwittingly, was caught up in this fraud. And the data also showed that the transaction was made from a known or trusted device, which probably means that whatever the consumer had done had allowed the fraudsters to get access to her phone. And maybe that's how the fraudsters saw that one-time password. We don't know for sure, but we know that all these things happened. And the bank didn't have enough information to say that there was a problem with this transaction. So they were allowed to rely on the instructions they were getting. So unfortunately, we did not recommend compensation because the bank followed its agreement with the consumer, which says it can act on instructions given when using the consumer's confidential banking information. And it didn't miss an opportunity to warn her because all of its sort of electronic tests were met. This was coming from a known device. It was the consumer's device. The one-time password had been shared with the bank. So it looked like this was coming from the consumer. So in other words, the bank didn't make a mistake. The bad guy in this scenario was the fraudster. And, so then it becomes a policing matter to try to find that person. So really unfortunate. But I think that the takeaway from this particular message is please be very careful about any text message you receive. I would be reluctant to share, to click on any link that brings me to anything to do with my banking because it's just, I can't think of a single example where that would be a safe way to put in your banking information. I get nervous just pressing C to confirm my dental appointments. So just be very careful about what you click on when you get a text message, whether you're expecting one or not, because sometimes scammers, it's a numbers game for them and they just send out so many of these messages. And at some point you might be expecting a package, you might be expecting a refund. And then this text message comes in at that moment. I would be cautious before putting any kind of your personal information in response to a text message. Okay, next slide, please. So the next one we call the friendly fraud. And these are really unfortunate situations that do happen. We don't see these as much, but when we do see them, they're pretty unfortunate, and there are ways to protect yourself. So here in this case, Ms. G, an 82-year-old woman, gave her credit card to a trusted friend to help her pay her expenses. The friend misused her credit card over a 3-year period, accumulating around $75,000 in unauthorized charges and cash advances. And unfortunately, Ms. G was not checking her statements, so she didn't notice the charges that had been building up over all these years. So the reason why we're highlighting this particular situation is because we want to make sure everyone knows that, sometimes you are going to have a trusted person that you work with, which is reasonable. I guess the first thing is make sure it's a person you can really trust. In this particular situation, even though the person is known, it's hard to get your money back, right? So it's no use to you if this person gets caught by the police. because that doesn't get you your money back. You have to go through a lot of legal proceedings, and they might have spent all the money. You want to deal with people that you can really trust, maybe people who aren't in, who don't need your money, but also be really careful and review your credit card agreements, your credit card statements. Almost every credit card agreement says consumers must protect their cards and their confidential information, so you're not really allowed to just give away your card. And you also have to verify your transactions within a certain period of time, or else they're deemed to you're deemed to have agreed to them. So here, it's usually about 30 days. So you always want to check your statements just to make sure nobody is, if you have a legitimate arrangement where someone is with a POA or something like that, where they can do transactions for you, you want to make sure that you're reviewing it just to make sure that there isn't any funny business going on. Okay, so the next one is a really common one at this particular moment. This is the fake fraud investigation scam, and we've seen this in many different versions. So in this particular situation, Mr. B got a call from his bank, and I say bank in quotations because it's not really the bank. But what the fraudster is able to do right now with technology, they do this all the time. They're able to make it appear as though they're calling from your bank. They can have your bank name and actually a true bank phone number appear on your screen, so it looks like you're getting a call from your bank. They can spoof not just banks, but anything else like telecommunication or your phone company, like I was talking about in the other example. So unfortunately, you can't always see what you trust what you see on your phone. This doesn't mean you can't answer calls from your bank, but just if anyone from your bank calls you, just never ever give them confidential information. And I will explain more about that and probably repeat that a couple times. So in this case, Mr. B gets a call from who he thinks is his bank. The phone number looks like it's his bank, and the person on the phone seems to know a lot about him. Sometimes there's a lot of publicly available information about a consumer, about any of us, really. It's not hard to find information about people online. There's other reasons why this fraudster might have had information about the consumer. They could have bought information on the dark web. They could be working in cahoots with someone else. But quite often, they can just do a little bit of research about you. But in any event, they knew something about the person or something about the account. And so the caller said that he had been defrauded, and he was there. He was calling from corporate security, and he's there to help with an investigation into the fraud and to help the consumer and to protect his account. So, and he's making it sound like it's urgent, which is a very common strategy of fraudsters. So the caller, the fraudster, told Mr. B to log into his online banking, share certain information about his account, provide, and he said, the fraudster said, I'm going to send you information with a one-time password, and I need you to give it to me. So just to explain what's going on here, once the consumer has given the fraudster information about his bank account, the fraudster can then go in and change things, which then prompts the bank's security system to send the consumer the one-time password. And now once the consumer shares that password with the fraudster can then go in and make changes to the consumer's account or do transactions or add themselves as payers and things like that. So that's what happened here. They were tricked. So shortly after this, Mr. B noticed an e-transfer was deposited into another account. So really unfortunate situation because this person, was the consumer was acting in good faith, but the fraudster was able to fool him into participating in, to helping the fraudster get into his account and commit the fraud. So if we could go to the next slide.
Yeah, we're there, Grace. Yep.
Oh, thanks. Okay. Yeah. So, so when we investigated this complaint, we found that the consumer had shared confidential information with the fraudster, including the one-time verification password. And this particular password said, do not share this with anyone. And banks are putting that on a lot of their one-time passwords more often, which is good. But it's still confusing for people because some banks used to send you a one-time password when you called in for online banking. But often now these messages will say, do not share this with anyone. And also it says, we will never ask you for this. This one-time password. So because the consumer was warned to a certain extent and still shared it, we weren't able to recommend compensation because, there was no evidence that the bank made a mistake here that caused the loss. Effectively, the consumer had shared his information. There was a bit of a warning for the consumer, and unfortunately, the consumer shared that information. So they were at a loss, which is too bad. If we could go to the next one, great, thanks. Okay, so the next one, maybe many of you have heard about this, the grandparent scam. This happens, again, there's many variations on the grandparent scam. I'm going to talk about just one, but effectively, again, the hallmarks are very similar. Each time there's someone calling you claiming to be, a loved one, usually a grandchild. There's a lot of urgency and high pressure on you, and it sounds like there's a crisis and something bad happening to your usually the grandchild. So in this case, Miss W receives a phone call from someone pretending to be her grandson. He said he needed money because he'd been wrongly arrested while traveling, and he needed money for bail and a lawyer. And so he was, sounded desperate. This is her grandchild, and she wanted, so she wanted to help, and she wired a total of $30,000 in multiple transactions to the scammer. And this is just to illustrate with even more example. These calls, these are so frequent, this scam, and people often get caught up on them because everyone loves most people love their grandchildren, and they do really want to help, and they feel like the grandchild is being, is reaching out to them in desperation. So it really plays on people's emotions. And what's also interesting is that fraudsters are so clever, and they say, grandma, and then the grandmother will often be like, David, is that you? Because and then suddenly they start saying, yes, it's me, David, and then they learn that information from you. So it's a very, very clever and well thought out plan. And so people, if this has ever happened to anyone on the phone, you should not feel badly about being tricked. It's a very elaborate and sophisticated scam. Anyway, so she wants to help, so she wires a total of $30,000 in multiple transactions to the scammer. Later, when her real grandson visited, she discovered he had never requested this money, and revealing she had been scammed. So, in this case, the bank didn't compensate the consumer because they were following her instructions. You're allowed to go to the bank and transact. Anybody, and seniors or adults, they know what they're doing. And banks are allowed to follow their instructions. But there's a little more to it than that, right? So, which I'll explain. So, banks do have obligations to ask certain questions. And banks, there's also a seniors code, which we'll talk about later, where banks are actually supposed to look out a little bit to make sure seniors are not being defrauded. So the grandparent scam is well known. So we do expect banks to ask certain questions, and really they ask questions of most people when they're doing any kind of a larger transaction. So in this case, when we started probing about that, we learned that the bank representative had actually asked her why she was making large wire transfers, because it was a little bit unusual for her. And the fraudster, which we learned had through interviewing the consumer later on, had actually told her to lie about the purpose of her wire transfer, saying if the bank found out what this was for, they might not allow the transfer because, sending money to a criminal in another country could raise red flags. So there's always these elaborate stories that sort of make sense to you in the moment. But so then unfortunately they say, you have to just make up a story so that the bank won't ask you any questions, because the fraudsters know that the banks will ask you questions. And they said, it's really urgent that we get this money fast. So just tell the bank what they want to hear so that we can get these transactions done fast and I can get out of jail, right? So that you can imagine the pressure this woman is under. So she did. She lied to the teller and said she was sending money to a contractor doing work on her vacation home. Very legitimate expense. A lot of people have vacation homes, and depending on the location, it's a very plausible story. So if we could go to the next slide. So in this case, we ended up not recommending compensation because the bank made reasonable inquiries, and the consumer lied to the bank, so the bank couldn't really have known that this person was, was being tricked and defrauded. So, it appeared the bank had acted reasonably in following the consumer's instructions based on the information that it had, which is a really sort of sad ending to this story. But again, we're telling you these stories to highlight the importance of, taking a few more minutes, calling a trusted person, informing yourself about the different scams available, and especially, looking out for the hallmarks of any kind of pressure and sense of crisis that the scammer is creating. And so just to highlight a few misconceptions about fraud. Protection, there certainly are protections for consumers. Banks have very sophisticated systems to detect all kinds of online fraud. They stop lots of transactions. Um, but consumers often incorrectly believe that they are protected from all fraud and that their bank will return their money that they've lost to fraud, and that's not always the case. It really depends on the situation. There are certainly situations where you will be protected, but there are others where you won't be. Um, but in most cases, consumers are really vulnerable if they breach their account agreement by sharing confidential banking information intentionally or unintentionally. Now, again, there are exceptions to that. We won't get into too much of it today, but I think the takeaway is always protect your confidential information. But you can always complain, and you should complain, because there is sort of a complicated set of rules that govern all this. We're not going to go into all the details, but the banks know those rules, and at OBSI we know the rules, and so we'll make sure those rules are followed. So it is always worth complaining, always worth asking the bank if you can be compensated, or if they can get the money back somehow. Banks do cooperate with each other to try to resolve a lot of these fraudulent situations if they can. So I guess the takeaway is be cautious, but also there is always hope, and it's worth raising your concerns. So some of the protections I had mentioned earlier, we've just sort of highlighted a few here. There is the Canadian Code of Practice for Consumer Debit Card Services, which has a really it's a bit of a complicated structure, but it does have some really important protections for anybody who is using, or for any kind of fraud transactions where the card and the PIN are used. So there are situations where people might have been tricked by putting their card into like a fake machine, and then their PIN number was taken that way. There's some protection for people who are shoulder surfed, which is where someone looks over your shoulder while you're doing a transaction and then the card is stolen. So these are things that are included in the Canadian Code of Practice for debit cards. There is also a provision in there for trickery. So where there's very sophisticated scams where people are called and then a person comes to the home and they're tricked into giving their PIN and their card to the fraudsters. These are always fact dependent, but it's important to know that there are these laws out there that are specifically designed to protect consumers in situations where they've been scammed, often through no fault of their own. There's some provincial consumer protection laws that might apply to your transaction. Again, it's always fact dependent. And then there's the Code of Conduct for Delivery of Banking Services to Seniors, which I alluded to before. And that has a framework that requires that banks train their staff, which they do. So they should know to be on the lookout to make things easier for seniors for in all kinds of ways, but also to protect seniors, to be on the lookout for ways to protect seniors from being scammed. And banks often hold themselves out as having sophisticated fraud detection and prevention services, and we certainly hold them to that when we are examining complaints that we get when we see them at OBSI. So, in terms of tips to protect yourself, I think I was sprinkling some of these in as I was going through the examples, but this cannot be said enough. Be careful when you click on links in text messages and emails. Um, Number one, it can put malware on your phone, but number two, if it's taking you somewhere to ask you for confidential information, just really err on the side of caution there. And again, I can't think of a good example of where it would be okay to just put your information into something that has come to you, and certainly, especially if you're not expecting it. Strengthen your online security practices. So just be aware of, especially messages that are sent to you. Be careful about what you click on the internet. The internet is filled with fraudulent advertisements, unfortunately, for people offering services that are not legitimate. Regularly check your statements and your notifications from your bank. You can also set up notifications on your bank to give you all kinds of alerts when transactions go through on your accounts. Use secure Wi-Fi connections, so don't just hop onto any free Wi-Fi service, because other people can get onto that easily and see what you're looking at. Never give your confidential information to someone who calls you. So if your bank calls you, that's totally fine. But the bank calls me and says, would you like to renew your GICs? I say yes. I don't give them any of my confidential information. They have it. They don't need it. There are times when you have to give information to your bank, but you'll have to. But certainly, if it's an incoming call, never do that. You can always hang up and then call the bank back at the number that is on the back of your bank card. Also be careful about fake websites with phone numbers from banks, because sometimes people might just Google their bank. And if you're not on the right website, it can give you a fraudster's phone number. Always safeguard your personal information. You can enable two-factor authentication so that transactions can only go through if you've sort of authorized it twice. You can enable auto alerts. You can talk to your bank about how to do that if you're not sure. You can enable auto deposits for e-transfers so that money gets directly deposited into your account and you don't have to click approve, which can create confusion again about messages coming in asking you to take steps. If anyone ever sends you money, never return money to someone who has sent it to you. So there are a lot of scams, we didn't talk about them today, where people they might have bought something from you online or at or I don't know what but it's mostly like a buying scam where they buy something from you and they pretend that they say they've sent you too much money by accident and you have to return the money. That's a scam. So just never return the money. Talk to your bank about what happened. And always, speak to your trusted family members and friends to help to help them be more fraud aware, because you can spread the word to people to be more careful. And if someone was a victim to a fraud, it's still worth explaining to them how they can protect themselves, because once you've been a victim of scam once, it's very easy to be a victim again, because your name often gets out onto the dark web and people might come after you again. So it's never too late to start protecting yourself, and no one should ever be ashamed or embarrassed. They're sophisticated scams. So I know we've sort of given you a lot here, and I always think of the adage, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're out to get you. That applies here. It's always good to be super cautious. It's unfortunately the reality of the vulnerabilities that we have right now.
Okay, great. Thanks, Grace. I'm just going to do one case study with respect to investments. And this case study is about crypto fraud. So crypto like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. Crypto fraud is the #1 fraud issue that we investigate with respect to our investment complaints at OBSI. So, crypto's is a big thing these days. And so in this particular case, Ms. P, she was a senior looking to grow her retirement savings. And she found a company online while she was searching on the web, promising to help investors make money investing in crypto. And this looked good to her, and she thought it made sense for her situation. Unfortunately, the company was just a fraudster with a really slick website. So it looked great when she went to the website, but it was all fake. Okay. So the Ms. P connected with the fraudster, and the fraudster convinced Ms. P that if she invested in crypto with him, she would earn high returns on his savings. So the fraudster is always emphasizing that I'm the one that can help you get high returns. So invest with me, right? And again, they can be extremely convincing. So with the fraudster's help, okay, this is another thing the fraudsters have figured out, in particular with respect to seniors, that seniors like speaking over the phone, and also too they like it when someone will walk them through the steps, and so they offer to do this. So with the fraudster's help, Ms. P opened an account at a licensed, legitimate crypto dealer, then transferred $60,000 from her bank account into the account at the crypto dealer, purchased Bitcoin, and then transferred that Bitcoin to the fraudster so that he could invest it for her, sorry. And so the fraudster is walking her through all of these steps. Sometimes what happens is the fraudster will actually ask the consumer and get control over their computer to work through these steps with them. And sometimes they'll just do it kind of and walk them through step by step, sometimes having the consumer share the screen with them. Okay. So Ms. P transfers $60,000 from a bank account into the crypto account, purchases the Bitcoin, and transfers it to the fraudster so he can invest it for her. And unfortunately, once the crypto was transferred to the fraudster, it was gone. So crypto transfers are irreversible and they can't be traced. So Ms. P complained to the licensed crypto dealer and where she deposited her money and first purchased the Bitcoin, and said, hey, you should have warned me about potential fraud and stopped the transfer to the fraudster before it happened. In this case, the crypto dealer did not compensate Ms. P. And when we investigated the case, we didn't recommend compensation either. So when we did our investigation, we found that the crypto dealer had in fact warned Ms. P about potential fraud. When Ms. P was opening her account, the crypto dealer will ask the consumer a whole series of questions related to the transactions. It may be things like, what experience do you have in trading in cryptocurrency? They'll even ask, is there somebody helping you with this transaction? Are you doing this yourself, right? Unfortunately, Ms. P lied to the firm because the fraudster told her to. So she said that she was experienced in cryptocurrency, and that nobody was helping her with these transactions. She was doing it herself. Okay, so very unfortunate situation, but in this case, Ms. P, losing her $60,000. Okay, going back to something that Grace said before, fraudsters will often, are wanting consumers to lie, right? To lie to your investment dealer or lie to their bank, right? And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a few minutes, but banks and investment dealers will ask questions to determine, because they know the scams, right? They know, they've seen these fraudulent situations before. They'll ask you questions to try to determine if it is a scam or a fraud. And when they ask you those questions, be truthful in your answers, right? And as Grace said before too, don't be embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed. This happens to thousands and thousands of Canadians, but just be honest and so that they can help you. Okay. Okay, just very quickly, some tips to protect yourself from crypto fraud. So only deal with licensed investment professionals. You can search on the National Registration Database is what it's called to see if the person you're dealing with is a licensed professional. Fraudsters, will often hide behind fake identities. They say they're one person, they're not. They're a fraudster, they're somebody else. And once the scam is discovered, they're often untraceable. This next one is a really, really good rule to follow. So never send money or crypto to strangers or people you've never met in person. Okay. You may have interacted with them online. You may have interacted with them over the phone. But if you've not met with them in person, you should never send money or crypto to them. As Grace said before, be careful in doing your own research, right? There's lots of, fake information out there. As I was saying before, heed fraud warnings from your investment professional or your bank. Pause and reflect, right? Legitimate investments don't require rushed decisions, right? If you're being rushed, that's a red flag to slow down and think about the situation before proceeding. Talk to someone you trust, and be skeptical of high returns. It's the old adage, right? If it's too good to be true, it probably is. Okay. So there's a few tips from a crypto fraud perspective. As I was mentioning at the top of the presentation, we're just now going to briefly talk about 3 additional tools that are available to protect your financial well-being: powers of attorney, trusted contact person, and the office of the public guardian and trustee. So I'm just going to turn it over to Grace for the powers of attorney.
Great. So a power of attorney is a legal concept. They're reasonably well known, I think, but it's effectively you're giving someone the power to act on your behalf. So usually this is done by someone signing a document, sometimes in front of a notary. or in front of a witness at a minimum. It depends on the province, actually, how this is done. In most Canada, the person who you appoint is called your attorney, even though that person does not have to be a lawyer. And your attorney it depends on what's written in the power of attorney document, but this can allow someone to do your banking for you. They can sign checks for you. They can buy and sell real estate in your name. They can buy consumer goods for you. But the attorney cannot make or change a will for you. They cannot add a beneficiary on a life insurance plan or give a power of attorney to someone else. So they can't do anything sort of testamentary or shift the power of attorney. So it's important to make sure those things are done before you need to rely on your power of attorney. But and then there's all different types of power of attorney, which you can get legal advice on the kind that works for you. But this is just a little oversight of overview of the types of powers or what a power of attorney is. There's the regular power of attorney. Like I said before, this can be a more comprehensive delegation of authority for a wide range of financial and legal matters. The scope will depend on what's written in it, but it can cover a wide range of financial and legal decisions, including managing investments, real estate, personal affairs, and your health. But then sometimes your bank will have power of attorney, or your investment firm, and that's specific for managing whatever account, I guess, would be listed on that particular document. So it's a bank-owned form. It's you can talk again, you can get your own legal advice on this, but often you'll probably, you might want to have both. Banks are not required to accept your power of attorney. They usually do, though. But it's great to have a relationship with your bank so that they kind of understand that you have one, so that it's not a surprise to them and it'll make things go smoother. But the bank, the banking POA, that's very specific to that bank. It doesn't help you elsewhere. But it can be helpful for that particular bank, and it limits the scope of the power of the attorney's powers granted in the document. It's usually about, making deposits, withdrawals, transferring funds, paying bills from specific accounts.
Okay, great. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm going to go quickly through the next couple of sections. So trusted contact persons. So this is actually a concept that is used in the investment industry versus the banking industry. So your investment advisor is actually required under securities legislation to ask you if you'd like to appoint a trusted contact person. And what a trusted contact person is someone who your advisor can contact in limited circumstances if they have concerns about your well-being. Okay, either that may be that they feel that you may be the victim of fraud, or financial abuse, and those types of situations. Okay, so it's quite limited, but at the same time, it can be very, very helpful tool. So the limited circumstances, just go through them quickly. If your advisor can't get in touch with you after repeated attempts, so they may be concerned that you're not well or something that has happened to you. Maybe you are always readily available, but now you're not. The trusted contact person can, so your advisor can reach out to your trusted contact person, right? See if they know if you're okay. So, but your advisor can contact your trusted contact person if they think maybe you are being the victim of a fraud or you're being financially exploited by somebody. There are situations as well where, if your advisor may be concerned that of your whether or not you're able to continue to make financial decisions on your own. So maybe your behavior has changed. And the trusted contact person is someone that your advisor can reach out to and talk to about that. Your advisor may also contact your trusted contact person just to confirm your legal representative. So who is your power of attorney? Who is the executor on the estate? Who is your lawyer? Okay. So I would strongly, if you have been asked by your advisor, would strongly recommend that you consider appointing a trusted contact person. If your advisor hasn't asked you about it, I would strongly recommend that you reach out and talk to them about it. And then just very quickly with respect to the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee, it is a substitute decision maker of last resort. So, the It is best to try to plan ahead, organize your power of attorney and your estate documents while you have the capacity to do so. Okay. The Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee is there to help with situations where the person has not made those arrangements, so they can step in and make financial decisions for adults who have been found to be mentally incapable, and health decisions as well. So again, it's always good to plan ahead and to get those things organized in advance. But if you know somebody who hasn't done that, the Office of the Public Guardian and Trustee is maybe an organization that you'd like to reach out to for some help. Okay. And so just really quick, just a summary: take proactive steps to protect yourself, be vigilant about potential harm, financial fraud, appoint a power of attorney and trusted contact person that can be beneficial for your financial well-being. And of course, you can always visit our website for more resources on seniors. And that's it for our presentation today.
Thank you so much, Grace and Rob. That was an excellent overview of all you do to support individuals. And this is the type of scenarios that people may encounter and what your role is in terms of supporting. But I think the best part is the prevention tips that you both went through to let people know how to protect themselves. The scammers are way ahead of us. Every time that we think that we've addressed it, they've come up with something new. So we do have a few questions though before we end today. Some are quick. The first one is OBSI available nationally, or is it only Ontario?
It's national for the whole
That's-
country.
Exactly.
And our
So
services
that's
are free in French and English.
yeah. So across, so everyone knows that. And again, going to the website, which I'll post in our links as well for people to get more information, it would be very helpful. What about there was a situation about online banking. So if someone's doing online banking by phone, is that safe to pay bills? And then there was also a question about online banking by the phone around credit cards. So then they ask you for that security number. Is that a safe way of doing banking, or could be people scammed, or is that from your experience around that issue?
Like, I think we can say I've never seen a case where you're calling into your bank where there's a problem. I've not, well, like, Rob, unless you've seen anything,
Nope.
it's what, when someone calls you, right? That's the distinction I would make. So doesn't mean there can't be problems. We've just never, I don't think I've ever seen a case where there's been a problem, like when you reach out to your standard online banking to do your banking. But Rob, do you want to add anything to that?
I just might repeat what you said earlier, Grace. You can, if somebody calls you, you can always hang up. If someone says, "I'm from your bank," okay, hang up and then call the number of your bank on the back of your card, right? And then you can say, "Hey, I was just given a call. Someone said there's a problem with my account. Is there a problem with my account?" And way more often than not, there's no problem with your account, right? So
Great.
hang up and then call your bank directly. Yeah.
And Grace, I know you were talking about text messaging, I think one of the scenarios. Is it, and lots of people hear about, certain companies don't text message. Is it true that banks will never text message a consumer?
Banks do text message consumers, I believe.
Okay. So that
I
was
think
just
so.
wondering. I
Yeah,
think that
yeah, I
was
think so. I'm pretty sure they do.
okay, because
Um,
that was, I guess that's some of the questions, like if someone's texting and not to
yeah,
click a link.
yeah, no, you can specifically ask your bank to text you actually for notifications. So it can be a good tool, a really useful tool. But the key is, don't go putting your confidential information into like a link that's sent to you
Right. I mean,
without
I know I just
ordinary
had that the other
verification.
day. If I'm going to approve a payment, for instance, then I will get a text message saying, I'm paying from a credit card, and to confirm that this is actually me using the credit card, it goes to my phone to verify that I'm
Yeah,
using my credit card. So I had to click or input the code that they gave me from the bank to put into
yeah,
the
yeah.
credit. So it's
It's a
a
part of
secondary.
exactly. It's part of the two-factor authentication.
There was another question. Are you able to provide assistance in situations where banks will not recognize a legal representative's authority to manage an older adult's bank account? And what about delays in getting the banks taking instructions from legal representatives? So that might be a situation of a power of attorney or joint bank accounts. I would suspect that might be the case.
Yeah, so we can look at some of those cases, but not all of those cases. So under our terms of reference, some of those cases and situations may be out of our mandate because it is a risk management policy of the firm or the bank, right? So they are trying to protect their clients as well. Right. And so they have quite stringent policies and procedures as to what powers of attorney they're going to accept, what form it needs to be in, et cetera, et cetera. So sometimes we can look at those and sometimes we can't.
Okay. And are you seeing an impact of AI in these fraud scenarios lately, now that we've, it's sort of coming to be and it's everywhere? Like the voice of the grandparent scam, for instance, that I guess maybe it's the same scenario. It doesn't matter if it's AI or if it's someone else calling in person. Does that make a difference in terms of your investigations?
I think AI is going a million miles an hour right now and is, developing day by day. I think the grandparent scam is an excellent example of where, a fraudster may use AI to try to sound like a loved one. We haven't seen, I don't think, too much of AI in our cases, Grace, if directly, but certainly there's no doubt it's going to become more and more prevalent.
Okay. There was just another question about powers of attorney. I knew some of these might come up. And they may be just bank specific versus the OBSI involvement. So if a person has a joint bank account and the joint POA for the property, and that other attorney for the power of attorney for properties preventing access to the bank account, is that something that the OBSI would be involved in if the POAs they're not allowing the access to the banking or the information that the person's allowed to have?
This one sounds like it might be a very fact-specific situation that we would have to look at. But I mean, generally, we need all the parties that are relevant to the complaint to be complaining, I guess, is a general rule. So, but it would be something we would have to look at depending on the situation.
And then I'm just sort of going through quickly here because we're almost running out of time. Yeah, so some of the specific questions around case scenarios, you can make direct complaints or direct inquiries through OBSI because we don't have time to go into specific cases with people that have situations that they might be interested in learning more about. The one question I did have is you talked about so the banks, when you do your investigations, going back and saying the banks talked or they said that they had given some warning about the fraudulent. So do the banks keep documentation then of any communications that they have with consumers about warning them about this may be a fraudulent issue, and then the person still goes ahead and transfers the money? How does that work in terms of your investigation with the banks?
Yes, they can have notes on file. That's actually, it's a good practice certainly for banks, and a lot of them do that. They'll have, especially if they have concerns, they make notes on file. There can be emails. It really depends on the situation. Sometimes actually banks stop transactions and require their compliance to reach out. So then there's actually a really thorough email chain about some of these transactions. So, and then sometimes we interview the bank employee and they'll give us information, and then we also interview the consumer, and then we say, hey, is this what they asked you? And they say yes, and then they explain what happened. So it's often corroborated. If we have conflicting stories, that's a different situation, but often sometimes we don't. So it depends.
Okay. And then just the last question, are trust companies under OBSI? Do they fall under that, or is it just banks?
Yes, trust companies fall under OBSI as well. Banks, all investment dealers, and also credit unions as well. In several provinces, not Ontario yet, but several of the other provinces.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both for the great informative information that you've provided, and for all the people's questions and comments. We will try to I will post all the contact information on the website for OBSI to get contact with you directly if they're interested in making further complaints or finding out more about your services that you provide. Just to wrap up, though, I do want to let people know that we do have a podcast where we do talk about frauds and scams. We did an interview with the Canadian Anti-Fraud Centre, which is another place where people can report any of these kind of situations as well, as because that's their job, is to try to take these people out of business. So we have a podcast. We're starting our season 2 coming the next month. You can reach out to us, as I indicated, to get further assistance or information and resources as well, by phone, email, or our website. We post a lot of information and prevention tips through our social media accounts as well, so people can reach out that way to get connected with us. So I do want to thank you again, and thank for everybody, and we will have our recording up in the next week for everyone to have a view, because I did have some people say that want to have another session or another education, so maybe we could do a part 2 in the future. So thank you both. Thank you for our ASL interpreters for joining us. Lots of positive comments coming in through the chat box to both of you. So so thank you again.
Thank you very much for having
Great.
us.
Thanks, everybody.